it's not always comfortable. And that's why we talk about there's a little sharp pain when you start charging directly through the storm. But over time, you build up some calluses and you build up some thicker skin, and you charge through it, and the sharp pain, you just kind of brush it off your shoulder, and you just keep charging because you're going to get through it faster, and you're going to get to that sunny sky and that green grass. And like you said, entrepreneur or small businesses, a lot of times, if you can't have that buffalo mindset, you're not going to last very long, because a lot of times it is only you, or it's a small group of people. And so if you don't do it, or your small team doesn't do it, then it probably isn't going to get done.
In Napoleon Hill's timeless classic, Think and Grow Rich, he defines a mastermind group as the coordination of knowledge and effort between two or more people for the attainment of a definite purpose. In this podcast, that coordination is created between you, me, and our amazing guests. Our definite purpose is achieving extraordinary results in your business and your life. I'm your host, Brad Mulvey. Welcome to the Millennial Mastermind Podcast. Hello, Millennial Mafia. Welcome back to the Millennial Mastermind Podcast, where it is my pleasure to interview guests who will provide you with the tools, tactics, and inspiration to take your business and your life to the next level. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing my friend Pete Honsberger. Pete is the author of Don't Burn Your Toast, the guide to an unforgettable wedding speech. He's also the director of client services and lead facilitator at Culture Shock, a high-performance culture development firm. Culture Shock helps organizations all over the U.S. build cultures that attract and retain talent while growing their bottom line. Pete also was on Cleveland's 25 Under 35 Movers and Shakers Award winner. So Pete, welcome to the show, man. I'm pumped to have you on.
Thanks, Brad. I feel like it's been a long time coming.
Yeah. I mean, we were saying before we hit record that you and I have just gotten together for breakfast and coffee a few times, and they always end up going 2-3 hours. If we would have just hit record on any one of those conversations, they would have been epic podcasts. So I have no doubt that this is going to be much of the same.
Yeah, exactly. Same here.
So there's a lot that I want to dive in with you today. Some of the stuff you're doing at Culture Shock, I'm sure we'll get into a little teaser, the Buffalo mindset and things like that. But before we go that route, just want to touch briefly on the book you wrote, which is just fascinating to me that this is some side project that you knocked out and now it's out in the universe. So can you tell us a little bit about A, why you decided to write a book, and B, why wedding toasts was that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably first of all, it's been a dream of mine since I was a kid to write a book. I've always been interested in writing. I've always looked at any book that we had to read in grade school, high school, college, and wondered, try to put myself in the shoes of the author, wondered, like, how did they start? Why did they decide to do this? How did they take an idea and flesh it out that far to make something great that people are going to talk about for years and years and years? And so it's always been a dream of mine. I never knew if I could actually do it, because the execution of things is a lot different than having the idea.
Right.
And so for a long time, I was trying to figure out a topic. I had started a bunch of fictional things, and I just never got too far with them because it's a lot of work. And in 2012, my brother asked me to write and give his wedding toast at his wedding. And what I did is I made the entire thing. I didn't plan on this, but I made the entire thing into a rhyming poem of a wedding speech. And it went over really well. It was funny. It was from the heart. And I thought, that was a lot of fun giving that speech. And so I sort of started telling some of my friends and family about that. And I had some friends and family who were at the wedding that would come up to me and ask me about it afterward. And then people started asking me to help them write their toast for their best man or their maid of honor speech at a wedding. And so I started trying to inject some jokes, some humor, some sentiments that were from the heart. I was asking some questions to some of these people. And after about, a couple of years went down the road, and after about the fifth or sixth person to ask me for help on their wedding toast, I thought I might be onto something. There might be a market for this. There might be a lot of people out there who aren't sure where to start when it comes to writing their toast, don't know how to get from zero to a rough draft, or they feel like they've written it, but it's a little cliche and they want something a little bit more memorable, a little bit more unique in the toast. And so that's where I would come in asking them some questions, taking a look at that, saying, hey, this might be funny, or have you ever thought about ending it like this instead of that? And so that's how the idea was born. And honestly, the way that I started was one day just on a laptop, opened up Microsoft Word, started typing out what I thought was an intro. And then I went back and outlined some chapters. And honestly, what I did is I worked 2 or 3 nights a week at a coffee shop after work, 2 hours or so, just see how much I could get done. And then on the weekends, I'd try to, sneak in an hour or two on a Saturday morning or a Sunday evening. And I did that over the course of about 6 months. And so what I found was that as little work as you want to do in any given day, as long as you do it over a course of time and you're consistent with it, and you're also patient, because it can be frustrating when you want it to be done and you want it to be out in the public, but you've got to be patient with it. And I just used consistency, and eventually good ideas started coming out, and good lines and questions, and I was remembering more things. So that's really what it was for me, consistency and patience.
I love that. Yeah. I think consistency is such an important message there, because you can accomplish anything. You can build anything if you're just consistent with it. I mean, that's the only reason I got to 100 episodes on this podcast, is because week in, week out, just kept that consistency.
Yeah.
And so while now you're just about a month out from your own wedding, so there's probably some high pressure on the best man, poor son of a bitch.
It's become a running joke with all the groomsmen who are in the wedding, my best man. There's like some sarcastic humor coming in, and I keep talking about how I'm going to be really tough on them, and I'm going to be listening like a hawk for everything they say.
That's awesome. So we won't spend the entire episode on the book, but a lot of times, one other area that I do want to dive into is a lot of times the authors we hear from on podcasts, whether it's this one or any other, are frequently those who have, one of these massively successful books that has sold millions of copies. And you get a little bit of that success bias, where you hear their advice, their perspective of things, but this is after the fact that, they're the one in 100 or one in several thousand that's really blown it up. So while your book is really freaking awesome, I know because I have a copy signed by yours truly, but it hasn't quite reached that 4-hour work week status yet, right? It's well on its way, but isn't quite there. So I just wanted to talk to you and get your perspective on that post-publishing phase of expectations versus reality, and now the work that you're putting in, because I know that it's not something for you that you just put out in the world and said, cross your fingers, hope it sells 1 million copies. I know now that you're doing some more work to continue to push the message of that book, get it in front of a new audience and all of that. So would love your perspective on just kind of that expectations versus reality after the book was published, written, kind of packaged, ready to go.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've heard on your podcast being talked about, every overnight success takes 10 years.
Yeah.
And for me, it was kind of funny, because you could ask my fiance, Jenna, that, in the process of getting it published, I was really proud of the product. I'd worked really hard on it, and you see the graphic design and the layout, and it starts to come together. And just naturally, I just got really excited and started thinking, oh, well, this might sell 5,000 copies in the first month, or I want to sell, my goal is to sell 10,000 or 100,000 copies, because, there are 2.5 million weddings a year in the United States, and that's 5 million speeches. And why wouldn't, 20% of or 10% of the people giving a speech want to buy this book? And so that's the unrealistic expectations that start coming along with it when you get really excited. And so the reality has been a lot slower for me. And I think as of this time, we're talking 15 to 20 being sold a month on Amazon.
Which is really freaking cool, by the way. Yeah.
The perspective is interesting. Like it depends on what your perspective is. If I really expected that I was going to sell thousands of books right away with no name recognition, with nobody knowing how to find it other than friends and family, then it would seem like, hey, it's been a really slow start. But if you think about it, that's not just friends and family buying the book. I had a couple sales from Amazon Germany a couple months ago, and I have no idea how that happened. And so it's pretty amazing to think that I've probably been helping 15 to 20 people a month. A lot of them I've never even met, with this journey of writing a great wedding toast. And so I like to think I'm trying to elevate the level of wedding toasts around the world for anybody who buys it. But the expectation versus reality is a really interesting thing, because if you expect a lot, then a lot of work has to go into that. And I've had to check myself a few times and say, look, I've got to be patient. It's not going to happen overnight. But I feel like I'm building something brick by brick, which when I think about it, it really excites me a lot, because it's inspired me to do some work outside of just the book and just telling people and friends about it. So I've developed an Instagram account at Don't Burn Your Toast, which, I try to provide lines that people can just borrow or take for themselves, and put some images in the background of it. I've been approaching a lot of local wedding flower shops and suit shops and bookstores and things like that, where they'll buy a couple copies at a time, or they'll sell them on consignment for me, and just get them out into the public a little bit that way. So it's been a really grassroots style effort. But I think over time, if I continue these efforts consistently, like you said, consistency, I feel like the book is not just a 1-year thing. It's something that is going to be able to add value to people trying to give speeches for years to come.
Oh yeah. And you and I think talked about last time we were together, but I think it's worth mentioning just for the audience that when I went to an event that Hal Elrod spoke at last year, who he was a guest on this podcast for episode 99, I believe, and he wrote the book Miracle Morning, and his story, and he showed us a graph of his book sales by month for the first, I think that book came out maybe in 2012, but it showed the first, I think 2012 to 2014 by month, and the first 2.5 years worth of sales were pretty much flatline. That first month you saw a spike where his friends, family, everybody he knew bought it. And then it just kind of slowly either grew barely or just totally flatlined. But what he was doing over that time, over those 2 years, was over 100 podcast interviews and talking to more and more people about it. And it started spreading word of mouth. And it looks on that graph like overnight, it just hockey curve growths up.
Right.
And the only reason it ever got to that point was because he was doing just what you're talking about, putting in that effort of, marketing it, talking about it on podcasts, talking about it just to people who he connected with, having a link at the bottom of his email signature. Yeah. And eventually the momentum got to that tipping point where it really started to pick up speed. And now, he's an international bestseller and just totally kicking ass. So I think it applies definitely to you, but also to probably a lot of the side hustles that some of our listeners are working on that may not have gotten to that tipping point yet, that it just requires that consistent effort and patience that you mentioned. So
yeah, I mean, it's inspiration to not give up too.
Right.
I think you put a lot of work into something, you think it's going to be successful immediately because you're so excited about it. And then you can get discouraged right away. If, 6 months down the line, you're like, I put in all this work and why aren't I seeing the results that I want? It's good. It's cool to see that hockey stick of increased sales and awareness exists. And so it kind of inspires you to say, look, maybe I want to continue to work on the next project, but let's not scrap this because there might still be something here. We just haven't found exactly what's the tipping point.
Right. So the last question on the book then I'd like to ask is, now that you are a published author, I mean, you type Pete Honsberger into Google or into Amazon, boom, there you are with your book. have you noticed, has there been any benefits that you've noticed to, being a published author and actually having this book out there in the world?
Yeah, it's definitely a talking point that I can bring up, or that people will introduce me to someone else and say, he's the guy who wrote the book. And so it's kind of funny locally that you can do that. But I would say the other biggest benefit for me has been people coming up to me at weddings now. I think we were invited to 9 or 10 weddings this year, and my own wedding's happening next month. And people come up to me and say, hey, just so you know, I bought the Best Man the book, or I bought the book for the maid of honor. And I've had a couple best men come up to me after their speech and say, hey, how did it go? I read the book and I loved it. Thank you. How did it go? And it's like, it's just a sense of pride. And I feel like I'm actually doing a service for people when I get that help. So that's, the best feeling that I can get out of it is when someone tells me, hey, I read this and it helped me, or it made me think about adding this, or I decided not to make the beginning really cliched, like a lot of speeches. So those have been some of the benefits, the interpersonal and the relationships, and also the fact that I've had some friends that I haven't talked to in a couple of years, friends from college or high school, will just randomly text me or call me and say, hey, just so you know, I got the book, and it's enabled me to reconnect with some old relationships as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that's just validation that it's a good product. So it's just a matter of time before it's in the hands of that 20% of people. And listen, I've been to a lot of weddings. I'm in that chapter of my life where there's, double digits some years. And this is a needed product. God, I've sat through some painful speeches. So I think that there's definitely the market out there. So anybody who's watching the video of us right now chatting is probably looking in the background of the room that you're in, and they see this giant animal on the wall. And you want to talk a little bit about the buffalo and the buffalo mindset and kind of what that is and kind of what it means to you?
Absolutely. So at Culture Shock, which is my primary occupation, our number one core value is be a buffalo. And that's why we have buffalo on the walls. We have it. We've got a giant 5 foot high by 8 foot wide vinyl buffalo on a different wall in the office. And really it comes from folklore that buffalo are much more native to the United States than cows. And therefore they act completely different when a storm comes. Buffalo have been around a lot longer. Cows were just brought over a couple hundred years ago. And so what happens when a storm comes, imagine a storm coming west to east across the Great Plains of the United States. Cows as a herd, when they see that first piece of hail, when they hear the thunder, they see the lightning, they turn and they run away from the weather. They run east. Buffalo do the exact opposite. They're kicking up dust, they're making noise, and as a herd, they're turning and they're charging directly into that storm. So imagine them running west. Well, what happens to the cows is they're trying to get away from the weather, but it follows them because they're running parallel to it. All right. And so they end up in the most amount of pain for the longest time possible. Buffalo get through the storm a lot faster because they're charging head on into it. They might feel some sharp pain right away because they're running directly into a storm, but they get through it to those sunny skies and that green grass a lot faster. So that mindset for us, the buffalo mindset, is I'm going to charge head on into all the issues, the challenges, the opportunities in my life, whether it's professionally or personally. If I've got things I need to iron out with a coworker or with, a vendor or relationship we've got at work, even, within my own family, we're going to charge head on into those things, and we're going to do it respectfully and with tact. But the companies that we found that are the most successful and the cultures that are the most successful are ones that consistently address issues, challenges, questions head on, as opposed to running away from them, sweeping things under the rug, hoping other people don't notice. On an individual level, do I make a choice, make a move, make a decision, take ownership for things, or do I hope somebody else makes a play? And the most successful individuals we've worked with in companies that really, get on that Weatherhead 100 list in the Cleveland area or or they go from, 3 million to 5 to 10 million in a year. Those are the ones that have that buffalo mindset. They tend to deal with things head on, as opposed to running away from issues, hoping that things go away, hoping somebody else makes a move. So the buffalo mindset is something we really believe in a lot.
I love that. And it makes total sense with that analogy. And for anybody who, this show is for entrepreneurial millennials and individuals who may have a side hustle, may have a business right now, or maybe thinking about it. In a large company, it's easy to hide. It's easy to, go in at 9 o'clock, do your couple of little things and leave at 5 and just maintain and coast. And even some people can even thrive that way. But if you're of the entrepreneurial mindset and you do start your own thing, especially in those early days, throughout the entire life of the business, because you're going to be the leader, but especially when it's just you, there's nowhere to hide. It's all on you. And you have to have that mindset to be able to charge through those tough times, because they're going to come up. I've seen it in my personal life and with the podcast and my business life, but it's not an easy thing. So is there any kind of actionable advice that you might be able to give us that can help us kind of charge into the storm? When you see those thunder cloud, those dark clouds rolling in, hear the thunder and see the lightning, any way that we can kind of fortify and strengthen up to be ready for the challenge?
Yeah, a couple things that have been helpful for us. Number one, I think of the buffalo mindset as 100 different little decisions a day. So if I make a mistake for a client and I double book myself, I would ask myself in my head, all right, am I going to just ignore this and hope this goes away, hope somebody doesn't notice, hope somebody cancels on me? Or am I going to be a buffalo? As soon as I know I've made a mistake, it's my responsibility as someone who, adopts a buffalo mindset. Am I going to call that person and say, look, I screwed up. I made a mistake. What can we do about it? And so I think of it as 100 little decisions a day. We try to tell bad news fast, right away. We try to be as honest as possible. And then we try to be as proactive as possible. And so for us, it's been really helpful to be a mixture of bold, charging into the storm, but also humble, admitting when we make mistakes. And so when we've got an issue, once a week we have an internal meeting. We've got a list of issues. We'll just populate a list of what are the decisions we need to make in the next week. What are things that are concerning people and keeping us up at night? Or what is something that is potentially a conflict situation that we need to get through? So, we talk about, what are the storms that are brewing right now in our company and outside of our company. And then we try to list those. Then we prioritize what's the number one most important thing we need to talk about today, number two most important thing, number three, and then we start talking about those. We try to keep things solutions focused as well. So we're not blaming people for things. It's, hey, what's the issue? Let's discuss it. Everybody get a chance to say what you want to say. And then how do we solve it? We spend most of the discussion on, okay, how do we solve this? Or if we made a mistake, what was the issue? How do we avoid this happening again? And so on the issues front, being a buffalo is just identifying as many issues as possible, because the faster you identify them and smoke them out, the faster you can get through them. And it's not just a negative thing either. The other side of that is opportunities. Like if we want to be a buffalo about an opportunity and it's a big opportunity or it's daunting, we've got to create a plan against that opportunity. And that goes back, I think, to a lot of the things that you talk about on the podcast are, okay, how do you achieve something great? Or how do you achieve as a company, as an individual? You've got to have a plan against it. You've got to set a goal and you've got to have some kind of plan with benchmarks, and you got to know, what's the date you want to do this by. And so being a buffalo for us is solving issues in real time as much as possible and everything head on, developing a culture of trust where it's okay if I bring up an issue or disagree with you, as long as we're talking about how do we solve this issue, because we know we're on the same team. So we want to solve an issue. And then how do we really go out and attack opportunities? And for us, being a buffalo is about saying, all right, what's actionable within this opportunity that we can make progress on it how are we going to know if we're on track or off track? And then, what's the date that we're going to commit to things by so that we're actually going to achieve what we want to achieve?
I love that. So I want to kind of stick on this Buffalo theme for a moment. One thing you mentioned was you look at it as 100 little decisions a day. I love that because I feel like if even on the small things that are easier to face head on, that's where you start to build up that resolution to, take it head on. So when the bigger things do come up, you have some practice already. It's not like the first time that you're getting thrown into, call it a negative situation and not the opportunity one that you mentioned. You've done this before, just on a smaller scale. So you have some comfort of saying, all right, every time in the past that I've taken on an issue head on and try to just nip it in the bud right away, it's worked out much better than if I let it just sit in the background and fester. So I'll use a real life example for myself. In my first job out of college in a former life, I caught an error that I had made, and as a client-facing role, and it was ultimately that our company was going to have to eat $15,000 or $20,000. And to me, at that time, it was $1 billion company, so in the grand scheme of things, wasn't the biggest issue. But $20,000 was like more than everything I owned, right? And it's still no small amount, even in a large business. And so I had to make a decision of I could have just sat on it and hoped that nobody noticed and that it didn't become too big of a problem down the road. But if we did that, it involved the situation. It involved some advertising for this client, things that were going to be in grocery stores throughout the country. And if there was an issue, it was going to be in, several thousand stores around the country. And so I remember walking into my boss's office, head down, and just being like, I found this error that I made. I screwed up big time. Like, I thought that was it for me. I thought I was getting canned for sure. That was it. And, nobody was happy about a mistake. Nobody's ever going to be like, yes, you killed it on that mistake. Good job. But they were happy I brought it to them. And ultimately, later down the road, in like my performance review, I remember them saying it being a huge plus that I came to them with that mistake, and we could at least get ahead of it when it was a $15,000 or $20,000 mistake, rather than down the road where it could have been, a $200,000 mistake if there's lawsuits involved, things like that. So just a quick example of how I could see that playing out in a corporate role, but in your personal life it can be just the same, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's an amazing example. And it also lends itself to the fact that, like you said, if you don't deal with things when they're small, a lot of times they become big over time. Or you have to, if you try to avoid a situation, then you have to try to make up some kind of alibi or some kind of white lie. And then you get stuck in it. And then you decide, do I perpetuate this until it becomes this big issue? And then somebody blows up over it. Yeah. And so like, it's not always comfortable. And that's why we talk about there's a little sharp pain when you start charging directly through the storm. But over time, you build up some calluses and you build up some thicker skin, and you charge through it. And the sharp pain, you just kind of brush it off your shoulder, and you just keep charging because you're going to get through it faster, and you're going to get to that sunny sky and that green grass. And like you said, entrepreneur or small businesses, a lot of times if you can't have that buffalo mindset, you're not going to last very long, because a lot of times it is only you, or it's a small group of people. And so if you don't do it, or your small team doesn't do it, then it probably isn't going to get done.
Yeah, it has those catastrophic effects. And I, like yourself, am prepping for a wedding here in a couple months.
Yep.
And so just on a very personal level, especially early on in my relationship, I could totally see how the same rules apply. If there's a small issue that you don't face head on, all of a sudden, and in my own personal experience, it could be a time when there may be some alcohol involved. All of a sudden, this little issue that you let just kind of sweep under the rug blows up,
Yeah.
And so I've gotten better at that. I hope. We'll see. Time will tell, but it plays that same Buffalo mindset. Can be in your personal life, your business life, all facets. So I love it. One other thing that I know that you do quite a bit of at Culture Shock is facilitation. And I think lead facilitator is part of your role or part of your title in one way or another. So I think that in any type of leadership role, it's going to be important that you start to develop these facilitation skills. And that could be facilitating a meeting, facilitating a sale, just bringing people together. I think it could play out, and I could list 100 different ways that it could play out.
Yeah.
But I think it's a overlooked skill that doesn't get brought up very often. There's not facilitation books aren't on the top list of Amazon business books, but since we have an expert here who can help us learn a little bit about it, I would love to dive into it because I think it's a critical role that often gets overlooked. So what, in your opinion, makes a good facilitator for whether we can use a meeting for an example, but what makes a good facilitator?
I think the first thing is you've got to be a good listener and you've got to be an active listener. If I'm facilitating a meeting, it's not my responsibility to be the one that comes up with all the ideas and the solutions. We say typically the answers are somewhere in the room for the most part. Mm-hmm. So as a facilitator, I mean, just in the word itself, you are supposed to facilitate or direct traffic or moderate discussion that's happening within the room. And so if I'm talking the entire time, then I'm not facilitating. And so listening is a huge part of that. I think a second great attribute of a facilitator is to be attentive to body language. So you've got to be able to read what people are thinking, what people are indicating to you. For example, in a meeting, there might be an introverted person who's got something to say, but they're not comfortable raising their hand or trying to shout over somebody who's a lot more comfortable in a meeting setting. So it's on the facilitator to call on that person and say, hey, what are you thinking right now that you're not saying? Or I'd like to hear from you. You look like you might have something to say. And so those, number one, listening and reading the room are really important, but also the idea of being able to simplify. In a meeting setting, especially when you start getting more than 5, 6, 10, 20, 30, 40 people in a meeting, everybody's got their own perspective and their own idea. Somehow as a facilitator, you've got to simplify what everybody's discussing or what all the ideas are into some actionable steps. Because in our opinion, any effective meeting has some elements of solving issues or solving a way to how are we going to get to an opportunity and how are we can actually start to make progress on that. Because you can sit in a meeting for hours and just roundtable things and get nothing done. And in our opinion, that's not an effective meeting. An effective meeting is you've got to walk out of there with really clear expectations. Who's going to do what, by when. We only have one person owning each action item so that you walk out, everybody's in lockstep, understanding what's expected of them and how we're going to get towards this vision, how we're going to get towards this goal that we want to be at. And then maybe the last thing, and it sounds a little funny, but part of a facilitator's job is to stir up a little bit of conflict. Sometimes when it seems too perfect, everybody's in agreement about everything, then people tend to be holding back. And so it's our job to say, hey, does anybody disagree with this? Or does somebody else have a different perspective? Because now's the time to say it, and it's okay to disagree as long as we're focused on the solution. So if you've got an idea or you've got something different to say, it's your responsibility. Now's the time to say it, and we've got to be the ones that bring out those different perspectives.
I love it. Yeah. And I'm starting to get more and more plugged in with this concept of facilitation with the mastermind group that I host for this podcast and for the others that are going to spin off that. And right now there's 7 people, including myself in that. And the answer is always somewhere in the room. And at best, I have the answer 1/7 of the time. And that's being generous to myself, because the people on that call, they've got some amazing perspective, and odds are whatever meeting you're in, the people in the room are going to have some good perspective or be looking at a situation in a different way completely than what you're looking at it as. And I love the stirring up conflict, because you're totally right. If everybody's in perfect agreement right from the get-go, something's not being said, because people are just have way too many opinions and are looking at things through a different lens, that if everybody's in perfect agreement, it's either A, not that complex of a topic, or B, somebody's holding something back. So if you can tease that out, I think that's a huge skill. So those are some great tips. Is there any simple way that you could think of that people could start becoming better facilitators or practicing this skill set?
I think starting with your own personal relationships is a good place to start. So I don't advocate, going to your spouse and saying, we need to have a meeting right now and sit down. But in those discussions, I think it's easy in a discussion to want to talk more than you listen. And I realize the irony in this, in that I'm giving you long-winded responses on a podcast.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
But in any situation, you can make a conscious choice that I'm going to listen more than I'm going to talk, and I'm going to ask more questions than I'm going to give answers. And it's been interesting. What I've found is that in networking situations, in business situations, if you ask questions, people tend to want us to give you answers. And out of those answers, you can be active listening and repeat a little bit of what they said back to you, or ask people to elaborate on things. And they usually will. And you can gather so much information. You can build strong relationships by mainly asking questions. Mm-hmm. And then once you get answers from them, if they're asking for your advice or they're asking for help, you can simplify some suggestions or some action items, or, hey, have you thought of this, based on what the information people tell you. So I think a one-on-one or a two-on-one conversation is a good place to start when it comes to facilitating. The other thing is, if you work for a company that has other human beings in it, you tend to have meetings. So,
yeah.
And so whether it's once a week or once a month, you can be a participant first, and just be that person that brings up and says, hey, I've got a question, or I've got a different opinion on this. Do you guys mind if I bring it up? Or, hey, this is just my opinion, but I think I see it a little bit different. So you can start to show facilitator tendencies while you're still a participant in a meeting. And the other thing is, if you're leading other people, or if you want to show initiative within your company, so say you're in your 20s and you're not leading any other person, but you're a participant in the meeting, a lot of bosses or leaders would see it as great initiative if you went up to them one time and say, hey, would you mind if I lead this meeting for us this time? Or would you mind if I run us through the agenda this time? I'd like to get some practice. And I'd love to take over this meeting for you. And great leaders, or even somewhat effective leaders, they tend to want to delegate as much work as they can, so that they can continue to elevate themselves and then help others, bring others along. So that's a lot of initiative, just to ask, hey, do you mind if I run the meeting this week? Or is there a way that I can take the notes for the meeting for you, and then help make it more effective? Or, hey, can I build an agenda for the meeting, and do you want me to round up the crew so that we're not all 5 minutes late? Like, hey, I'd really like to start this meeting on time, and I want to help you with that. There's all kinds of things you can volunteer to do that will give you an indication of some of the facilitator skills. And then a lot of times, the more initiative you show like that, the more likely people are willing to give you responsibility. So you could ask, if I can help with the meeting, and then 2 months down the road, you might be the one running that meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And any one of those strategies will make you look like a total stud as well to that leader, that manager, whoever it is that you're approaching with that. So that's great tips to get started. So I know I've taken up a lot of your time already, Pete, but one last question. if you could go back and give yourself any piece of advice, it could be in lines with the book, in lines with some of the Buffalo mindset, any of these things, but maybe to yourself as you're coming out of college, is there one piece of advice that you go back in time to give yourself?
Yeah. And even if you would have said any time in my life, I would have gone back to when I was graduating college. It was 2009. The banks had just collapsed. We were right in the middle of that mortgage crisis, or right on the beginning of it. And so, someone with a communication degree wasn't as in demand, for a lot of those jobs that people seem like, or people felt like were not the most important jobs to have. And so I ended up taking a couple different positions that I really wasn't passionate about, that I didn't really have a whole lot of interest in. I just felt like I've got to do something. Some of my friends are going to be accountants and they're going to have well-paying jobs. Maybe I should go down a road similar to that. My advice to myself would be to be patient and don't just jump at the first thing that you think is going to provide a paycheck. There's a ton of ways to make money in the world, and there's no shame in stringing together a couple part-time jobs when you first graduate from college, while you pursue some side projects, and while you really think about what am I interested in, what do I want to start. Now, I think it's great to try out a few different things, to dip your toe in the water, to taste a few different things. But I would tell myself, don't take something because you think it's what you should do. You can survive for a couple years, either living back with your parents or living in some sort of low rent situation. And that's okay. It's not something that you don't need to figure out your life when you're 22. So I would recommend to myself, hey, go and I remember this like it was yesterday. I had an opportunity. Somebody said, hey, do you want to be on a weekly radio show, internet radio, where we talk about the Cleveland Browns? And, it's a non-paying job, but we'd love to have you come in and just do that. Or you could write for this blog, and we're not going to pay anything, but I think it would give you good experience. A couple of those I said no to because I just was like, where's the paycheck in this? And I would keep my mind a lot more open, and I would have been more patient to figure out what I actually want to do, as opposed to what do I think I should do. Yeah.
And you said there, I think that advice is so applicable no matter what stage you're at. You said you don't have to figure out your life you don't have to have your life figured out when you're 22. And I would even say you don't have to have your life figured out when you're 28, when you're 32. Right. But it's so hard. And me saying that is pretty much the most hypocritical thing that there is, because it's something I need to be reminded of constantly. And it's something that I often beat myself up on. I'm like, God damn, I don't have it figured out yet. But
yeah, me neither.
Anybody listening to this show, I don't care what age you are, there's still time to figure it out. Plenty of time. So I love that advice. And wise Pete Honsberger talking to his younger self is also talking to me right now. So I love it.
To a mirror as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey man, thank you so much for coming on today. This was awesome. I knew just based on our previous conversations that this would be a good chat and a good episode, and it proved to be true. So thanks, man.
Absolutely, Brad. Thank you too. And I look forward to the next conversation.
Oh, and I guess last question, where can people find out more about you, your book, and things like that? I want to make sure I give you the opportunity to share that info.
Yeah, appreciate it. My, the website, the easiest way to get the book is just going on Amazon. Don't Burn Your Toast will populate right up there for you. If you Google it, the same thing will come up. You can check out that Instagram at Don't Burn Your Toast. My Instagram is just Pete, OHWAIT. Pete O Wait is my personal Instagram. You can check me on any of the social media as well. But I think Amazon's probably the easiest way to find it. Culture Shock is CULTURESHOC. So cultureshock.com with no K. You can find out any of the engagement, the culture, the team building facilitation. And honestly, I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody that was interested in facilitating and what makes a great culture and share some experiences with anybody. So awesome. Thanks, Brad.
Hey guys, thank you again for stopping by today to spend a little bit of time with me and the rest of the Millennial Mafia. Just a reminder, you can find all of today's show notes at millennialmm.com/podcast. And if you haven't heard yet, I'm opening up my calendar to you, the listeners, to hop on a 15-minute call with me. The sole purpose of this call is to connect and get to know each other. I want to forge true relationships with you so that we can build up an amazing network and community of ambitious millennials who are going to be the leaders and influencers of tomorrow. If you're interested, please just go to millennialmm.com/call and snag a 15-minute time slot. I look forward to connecting with you. Peace out.